you can go after your dream job, your dream career, but I think the most important thing is truly your dream person, like who you are. Because I think ultimately that is going to be the filter and the perception that then you see the world in. And so I think that's the most important thing by far of like, if you face social anxiety and you feel like you can't be yourself or in front of other people, then I think that's your sort of direct goal.
Welcome back to Hiring Talk on the HiredUp podcast. This is Josh. Today we have another very special guest on Hiring Talk to join me. He's Mark Metry. He is an entrepreneur, a very young entrepreneur, author, creator, mental health advocate, coach, teacher, keynote speaker, podcast host, and also just a loving human being. I love that you put that in there. That's great.
I was going to say also a baller.
Yeah, of course. I mean, once you have all of those, that's kind of a given, right? All those bullet points. But Mark is host of the Social Anxiety Society podcast, which is one of the top 100 podcasts. He's been featured on Forbes, TEDx, HuffPost, Mindvalley, and Inc. magazine. And he's also a best-selling author. So I'm really excited to bring him on today because Mark talks a lot about mental health, and really what inspires me the most about him is that it's another example of turning your greatest weakness into your superpower. And that's kind of what I want to start, Mark. So first of all, thank you so much for joining me on the HiredUp podcast.
Josh, thank you so much for having me. And I totally agree with what you said. And honestly, the best way that I found to introduce myself is I literally spent every single day of my entire life up until I transformed, literally just trying to stay as small as possible, always being that shy kid in the corner, never having friends, never talking, never thinking that I had a story, never wanting to share my story, never really wanting people to know who I was or my name or anything. And yet today, as like a speaker, podcaster, author, it's literally how I make my living, And so it's so interesting to see how, like you said, my ultimate weakness has gone and sort of been, in some ways my ultimate strength and really just made my career.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've accomplished such a lot in such a short period of time, and just even from the entrepreneurial side too. I mean, you were very successful by the time that you were 16 years old. So, kind of walk me through like how you got to from this, socially anxious person to like, walking through and starting to step out like of your comfort zone. Like, what was that moment where you finally started to have the courage to be able to do that?
Yeah, so for me, I was never really a shy kid, but probably around the ages of 9, 10, 11, my family and I, we moved from the inner city to a very small town out in Western Massachusetts. And this small town, it was cool and everything. There were great people. However, there was no racial diversity whatsoever. And this is also post 9/11 in America, and I'm a son of immigrants from Egypt. So I go to this town where basically nobody looks like me. All of a sudden, I'm faced with so much hostility, and that's really what begins to set the stage for social anxiety. And I'm basically like that for about 10 years of my life. I'm just like stuck in this bubble where every day I'm like mentally freaking out. I can't talk to people. As a result, I get terrible grades in school. I never join any of like the clubs, no sports, nothing. And so, yeah, it was very, very crazy to say the least. And for me, when I was about 18, I go off to college. And when I go off to college, I basically start to realize that, social anxiety is real. Back then, I had no idea what social anxiety was, what anxiety was, what mental health was. And so every time that I would my nervous system would force me to be shy and I couldn't talk and my mind would go blank, I would just think like, that's just me. I'm just like stupid, or I don't have talent, or I'm not smart enough. And when I go off to college, that's really where the first time where I realized that. And I start to force myself to step outside of my comfort zone. I try to talk to people. I try to make friends. But guess what? It didn't work. I epically failed. And I would try to talk to people and I would try to make friends. And it was just the most stressful thing ever. And what I found myself falling into was just the cycle in my mind where I was like, oh, I'm going to be stuck like this forever. And I lost all my sense of hope. And next thing I knew, I was in this very dark time in my life where I probably got seriously depressed for the first time in my life. I could no longer like fall asleep at night. I went from someone who had lifelong social anxiety to social isolation. I like stopped talking to my family, my friends. I start flirting with alcohol, drugs. I start eating a lot of food. Next thing I know, I'm like obese. And I have like all these other health problems too. And so next thing I know, I'm just like in this dark spiral where, next thing I knew, I was actually suicidal, where really the best way to describe it was my brain broke. And I was just sort of dragging myself every day through like this pain. And next thing I knew, I was about suicidal over the course of a month. And so kind of going through that rock bottom and really experiencing that really showed me in front of my eyes, like, oh, Mark, I'm going to be a statistic. Like, I'm either going to be a statistic who kills themselves, or I'm going to be a statistic in the other way of like, deep down, I always knew at some level that, I was special, not in like a kind of a weird way, but I always thought like deep down, I'm not who the person that I see in front of me really is. And so ever since then, it was just a gradual process of weeks and months and years of going through that. And like through that, I had to go through like this sort of like this recovery process that I sort of created myself where I, lost a lot of weight. I started to get physically fit. I came across this concept called nutritional psychiatry. And I really started to redesign my brain and I started to recover my brain, which then started to give me access over my mind. And I just went through this process. And then I went through this thing called exposure therapy, where it was really just layer by layer, step by step. And it was truly like a recovery process, almost in the same way where if you break your leg, for example, right, you go to the doctor, they give you a cast, they give you crutches, you come back the next month, maybe they give you a different kind of a cast, you still got the crutches, then you come back last, and then maybe they take off the crutches, and then they put you through physical therapy. So I sort of had to go through my own version of that eventually over that process led me to start like different businesses, my podcast. Eventually I started to get invited as a speaker. And so, the rest is history, if that answers your question.
Oh, absolutely. And in many ways, I relate to your story personally. And
I can tell.
What I found is that so many of these things, right, that you talked about are connected, right? Like as you were talking about your downward spiral, it's like one thing, the social anxiety leads to isolation. Isolation leads to depression, and all in that time you're not eating right, and not eating right is having an effect on your whole gut and your whole system, which is having an effect more on your mind, which compounds everything, so it's just like this Jenga, blocks like just and so
it's like this Jenga, and then also too is like a lot of the times when people think of social anxiety, they think, oh, he's just shy, or oh, he's just quiet, or oh, he's just an introvert, right? And that may certainly be the case. However, social anxiety is sort of like roughly thrown in these buckets. And like one of the most troubling issues with that is that, Harvard did a meta-analysis study, and they basically found that social anxiety is not only one of the most common mental health conditions in America, it's also the most correlated with substance abuse, social isolation, and suicide. And like I literally fell all into those. And so it's one of those things where someone growing up, it's like, oh, they're just shy, oh, whatever. But then as they become an adult, they start to have all these issues which are seemingly hidden. And then next thing you know, you're really suffering and you don't know what to do. You don't know who to talk to. And I'm just lucky that I made it out, because when I look back at my journey, I'm like, I honestly probably shouldn't be alive, like based on how things went. So I'm very lucky, and that's why I try to speak about it as much as possible, because there's a lot of people like that every, like literally hundreds of millions of people probably who go through this globally around the world.
Yeah, and you're doing very, very valiant work, in my opinion, because it's needed now more than ever. And especially with the rise of social media and everyone thinking everyone else is perfect except them, when in reality most people are kind of going through similar things, and no one's talking about it, so everyone just thinks everyone else is living a great life but them. It's just like this hidden thing. And
it's terrible.
I think this kind of comes back to, at HiredUp, so we're in the hiring space, right? We basically created this app that allows people to apply to jobs through video instead of resumes and cover letters, so they can show
That's awesome.
a hiring manager directly who they really are, and not just whittle them down to bullet points on a resume or special keywords or whatever, so that the tracking system can get their application through. And what we find is that a lot of people, they really love this, but there are some people that are like, hey, listen, I'm not good on video. I don't like looking at myself. I don't like the way I sound, and so I think that sort of is an indicator of some of that social anxiety too, is that a lot of us, we don't really accept who we are in like every facet of that. And I think that leads to a lot of other issues. And so like we talk about we want everyone to find their dream job, right? And we believe the only way to do that is to put yourself out there. Your dream job's not going to come find you. But the thing is, going back to social anxiety, so many people are scared to put themselves out there. They're scared of disappointment. They're scared of failure. But our CEO, the thing he's most scared of is regret, is not going for it. And so that's what we try to preach to others. And so I was just curious with you, because mental health finally now is becoming a mainstream topic. It's not like a fringe topic. It's not like, oh, it's just for weirdos or like really ill people or something. Like every single person to a degree has mental health things that they're dealing with. And in my estimation, I don't know if you've heard a lot about the Great Resignation or the Great Reshuffle that's going on in the job world, right? And I think a lot of that has to do with people finally prioritizing their mental health, finally looking out and saying, you know what, even though I may make a certain amount of money or whatever, I'm not happy. And I'd rather do something, even if I make less money, I'd rather do something that makes me happy than whatever it is I'm doing now. So I was wondering if you have, just kind of riff on that a little bit and your thoughts about that.
Yeah. So I'm someone who, my family is poor. They came to this country with $200. So up until maybe the age of 16, when I made my own money, I had no access to money. But I remember taking this one job over the summer, and that's how I saved up enough money to buy my first phone, which gave me internet access and let me to do other things. But I remember even when I was a kid, when I was 16, I remember being or even before 16, 14, I remember being and again, keep in mind, I was so poor. I was so I'm going to trade an hour of my life to get $7 or whatever the minimum wage was, or I think I got $5. And again, of course, you have to make money. Of course, you have to have a job, all these different things, you have to work. But I remember experiencing that as a kid and just being oh my God, why would I do that? Why would I literally trade my life away to make $5 an hour? And again, I'm not judging anyone or anything like that. But I'm so glad that I thought like that, because that really led me, although I had different challenges, that really led me to I would say not fall into the same challenges that maybe a couple of my friends have, where they literally all throughout school, they got the best grades, they focused, they put in 110% effort, they tried to get in the best colleges, they paid all this money, now they work at this great company and degree, and then they're like, oh, I have to work until 10 p.m. and I can't do that and I can't do this and I can't do that. And then listen, what I would say is everyone has different options in life. It's totally dependent on the person. I'm not trying to, bring anybody down or anything. But for me, that's crazy. Like for me in my life, like that is literally insane to where someone is paying me money in order for me to stay up late and do something. And of course I take my sleep and my boundaries very seriously because I do care about mental health. But honestly, I'm so glad that this is happening. Like I have different friends of mine who are in finance or in like these very labor intensive fields where, yeah, they get paid a lot of money, but the time that they spend, and then on top of that, because all the other managers and all the other people are also putting in a lot of time, I think there's also like a lot of, toxicity or like, I don't know, hatred or sort of people just not being nice to each other and people like lashing out at each other and people throwing their anger and their frustrations on other people, which then brings them mentally down. And like, if anyone ever does that to me, like you watch what happens to them. But, for me to hear that and that's like the saddest thing ever. And so I'm super glad that people are finally able to make the right decisions that they have for themselves, whether it's for them to be happy or whether this period of quarantine taught them more about themselves and like, hey, I should actually be doing this. I think people should do whatever they want. And I hope that, the world can sort of be more aligned in terms of careers and mental health, because I think for so much of human history, that's been the opposite. Like, for example, like my dad, I barely got to see my dad growing up because he was constantly working, minimum wage jobs in order for me and my family to survive, And so I think there's so many things. As great as obviously having a career can, and of course everyone has to find a way to make money. I'm glad that this is now happening because people are able to align their life more accurately to who they are, which of course will improve their mental health. So I'm super glad that it's happening for some people. Maybe I'm sure there's other maybe aspects that are maybe not so great. I'm not sure.
100%. And, we all, have people in our lives that, we want to serve, whether it's just in the community, you're serving so many people by the work that you do, or whether it's just your family or your relationship or whatever. And and at work as well. And if your cup isn't full, you can't really give, from a deep place, So if you're not taking care of yourself, physically, mentally, spiritually, that's going to affect your work. That's going to affect your relationships. You're not going to be at your full capacity to give, which is what we're all doing in some form or fashion, right?
Yeah, it's so important. I think too is that like so many of us just go through the emotions because we're actually suffering from underlying mental health issues. And I think a lot of times too, what happens is, if you've been at the same job for like 5 years, 10 years, then you show up every day, you see the same people, you do the same things. And like what starts to happen is your brain starts to sort of normalize it and build it in as like a habit so that you don't even really have to think about it anymore. And what happens is all that energy then gets put on let's be honest, I talk to a lot, social anxiety. So like your brain really doesn't like to think. So it creates habits to think so that it can take its energy and then put it on whatever is the most immediate in your system, in your brain, which for a lot of us, we're lacking awareness. And maybe we have underlying health issues. And so I think that's been one of the biggest things I've learned of like anything that you do for 5-10 years and you just sort of show up and you go through the motions, it almost kind of turns you into a robot. It almost kind of makes you stop thinking. It almost kind of makes you sort of just be like a passenger or like a viewer in your life. And like that's a highway to depression, social anxiety, not being fulfilled, feeling like your life is so empty. And part of the reason why I do what I do is like, even when I was 16, 17, 18, and I started to make a lot of money, I was making money actually from things that I actually really enjoyed doing. It wasn't something that I hated to do. But even then, I experienced the same thing where eventually you get to this level where maybe you have a certain level of success on the outside, or maybe you just sort of like check off the boxes. But then there's like this very hollow hole in your soul where you just feel empty no matter how much money. Like you experience these things where it's like, man, I should be super happy right now. But then you never really feel enjoyment or happy unless you go to the bar and drink alcohol or do drugs, because a lot of times we use these chemicals to sort of try to get us going. And that's really the only way that a lot of us can break through like this external armor that we have that makes us feel empty. But a lot of the times when you make those choices to consume those chemicals, there's often, similar to what you said, there's often harmful side effects that then have this whole cycle on your body, to your gut microbiome, to then the next day to how you sleep and how and so it's all connected, right? And so I think that's also a huge thing that I've learned, because anyone can have this problem, whether you are at a job you like, at a job you hate, you're an entrepreneur. I think a lot of us can experience these things. And yeah, I think overall, despite all the pain and problems that the last, couple years have been for humanity, I definitely think for some people it's sort of been like a wake-up call. So I'm definitely grateful for that.
100%. That's such a important thing that you said. And and for even people that do love their jobs or don't love their jobs, what we talk about is you can't put all your eggs in the job basket in order to feel fulfilled. There's so many people, job seekers out there who are looking for these, quote unquote, perfect companies or perfect jobs in order for them to feel successful or fulfilled or happy. And the truth is, even if you get that quote unquote dream job, you still have to find that happiness and fulfillment within yourself, and not outside of yourself, like you're saying, or at the bar, or doing these things, or these ego-driven things, what have you. So that's something that we've also seen as well.
I love that. It's kind of like a relationship, right? So I just like choked on something. So they tell you, like, in terms of relationships, they're like, oh, you're gonna find the person who's meant for you once you like totally love yourself and like you can love your life, and like you're not expecting that other person to like be your only source of validation and love. And so I think it's the same thing, and so it's one of those things. And I think something that I think about too is that you always have to deal with your mental health, right? So of course, maybe there are some people who may have been more susceptible or have a history of mental health issues, or people who have maybe been more just naturally resilient based on their life, their genetics, whatever. But I think you always have to take care of your mental health, right? And I always think about it like, even if tomorrow I wake up and I have like $68 billion in my bank account, and my podcast is the #1 in the world, and I have 100 million followers on social media, and I have the best friends and the best relationships in the world, and I'm eating the greatest food, I still have to take care of my mental health, right? Every single day. And so that's a really important thing to keep in mind, because I think so many of us, especially when, we're at the bottom, so to speak, I think it's a very natural tendency for the human mind to create like this imagination of like, one day when I have my own business and I'm making millions of dollars, and one day my life is going to be figured out and everything is going to be good. The reality is that problems are never going to end in life. And like the word life is synonymous with problems. Now, of course, you can have better problems. That's probably the goal. But you're always going to have problems, and you're always going to have mental health to deal with. And so I always try to remind myself of that, because you can definitely forget, like sometimes when I'm like, I'm being interviewed by awesome people like you, or like I just got this fat check in my email inbox, or I just got this success or that or this. And then it's kind of easy for me, get kind of like float up in my ego and kind of be like, all right, screw it. We're just going to have fun. Like nothing matters. Do it. But then it's like the next day I'm like, oh shit. Like, I'm sort of reminded by the human reality and by the human condition And I think that's very, very important. I think a lot of us, especially as you start to become more successful, it's much easier to forget about that, even though you're still a human, and it's sort of like there's this painting here. If you can see on my video, my girlfriend actually painted this for me. And it's actually this quote that says, you're allowed to be a masterpiece and a work in progress at the same time. And I think that's something that just personally really helps me to realize, like, hey, I'm great, I'm awesome, but also I'm a human being. And also I've got things to work on, and I think holding both of those sort of like paradoxical elements is very important just for being happy and taking care of yourself, if that makes sense.
100%. Just speaking truth over here. I love it. So you've done a lot of talks. You've put yourself out there. I think you said you have worked with like teams and companies before, talking about all of these things. In your mind, like, how can companies play a bigger role as far as their culture when it comes to the mental wellness of their employees? What are, in your idea, like, what are some things that maybe companies could implement or just or do in your mind?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's so many different scenarios, but what I would say is I really think that, generally speaking, companies need to hire specific coaches and certain skills for their employees, right? So, for example, like if you are, and for example, like an MMA fighter, the only way to develop that tool is by being trained in that sport. And so whether it's mental health or whether it's focus and productivity or whether it's how do you manage your emotions and boundaries, I think you need like people who are full-time who do that. And like, I know, for example, like a friend of mine who is probably like one of the most successful CEOs, not based on money, although his company makes a lot of money, but based on his employees. He showed me like this entire structure that he does. And like what he does is like for all of his managers, all his leaders within that are under him, he has coaches and like people that work with them just for them. And then he has another set of coaches for the broader set of employees. I think that is really great. And then also too, like he has these experts that kind of come in and they give all sorts of knowledge. Like, for example, they're like, hey, if you want your workers to, do well and for them to have great health, well, hey, you need to upgrade your chairs in your office because your chairs are like the cheapest thing. They're terrible for someone's posture. If you, pay X amount of money, you can get these certain chairs. So I think there's like certain things like that. And then I think too, just like sort of broadly speaking, just like offering opportunities, whether that is, like volunteering. And the same CEO, he also has like a monthly stipend for all of his employees just for like mental health. So like paying a therapist or anything or a coach for them. So he helps them with that. And then also too, like, when I was visiting his office, a bit back, I went to go to the bathroom to go to the bathroom. And I sat in front of the urinal, and right in front of the urinal, there's like a schedule. And it's like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And it's like, hey guys, Mondays at 11 a.m., we're doing a meditation session that's being led by this person. Hey, on Tuesday at 4:00, we're going to have like a walk. At Wednesday, we're going to have, this chef to come in and teach like this cooking class on how you can like cook healthier foods at home. On Thursday, we have like this yoga. So I think just like offering small things like that too can also be beneficial. So yeah, it's definitely a huge conversation. It's definitely a conversation that is definitely going to pick up more, but I think those are some useful ideas.
Those are fantastic.
What do you think?
Those are fantastic. And I think, and even if you are like a smaller business, maybe you don't have the money to go and get and hire a coach or what have you. Like, I think sometimes it comes down to as simply as taking time, taking a meeting and asking each individual in your company, like, how you doing? Like, how's it going? And just I think a lot of times when we're at work, there's this, sometimes we can get caught up in not seeing each other as the full on humans that we are, the very complicated, human beings that we are, the person that we are outside of work, our hobbies, our dreams, everything. Like, work's great. But I think that having that commonality of like really seeing and appreciating people for who they are, and like everyone's going through problems, everyone's handling challenges, everyone has their thing, and also everyone has their hobbies and what they love doing outside of work and stuff like that. So I think for business owners listening, like these programs that Mark suggested are absolutely fantastic, and I highly would recommend something like that. But sometimes you could even just start with just having actual check-ins that have nothing to do with work.
I think that's amazing. I totally agree with you. And I think the sad reality behind that as to why most places don't operate like that is because it's too heavy. It's like, hey, if you have certain clients and you have all these priorities and these deadlines, it's like, hey, that's the focus. Because the reality is, like, I'm sure that someone, where if they're talking to their boss for like the first time and they ask them like, what's going on, I'm sure that there's a part of their mind where they're afraid that if they say the wrong thing, then they're going to get fired, And so I think that's also a big deal too. But I definitely agree. And like anybody that I hire on my team, I always try to practice that. I always try to do that. And obviously maybe because of my work, it's a little bit easier, like just, given that people are more open to talk to me. But I always try to practice that. I think that's super, super important. So I couldn't agree more. And that's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of want to go to, for that business owner, specifically, like, what are some ways that in your mind, based on the work that you do, that leaders can become more effective and become those, like, I don't know, agents of change, if you will?
Yeah. So, I think one thing that comes to mind is, my friend Dan Chabell, super big in this space. You should have him on your podcast. He did this study with Oracle, and I think they found that, at least out of the groups that they surveyed, the people who struggled with their mental health the most was leaders and managers. And so I think especially because of COVID, because of like the insane business environment that a lot of us have been placed in and what we had and have to do to survive, a lot of leaders just sort of like took their mental health and are like, all right, let me just like focus on this and like I don't blame them, and so I think what I would say to any person like that is just like leaders and managers, if anything, they actually have to pay more attention to their mental health, because if they don't, that's going to leak out to their employees. And so if you can take care of those things, then I think you're going to have a lot more success overall.
Brilliant. I love it. Just to sort of kind of tie this all together, you're a person who put yourself out there, and because you started putting yourself out there, you're now, you have your dream job, you have your purpose aligned with what you do, that makes you money, and everything's kind of congruent in that way. But that wouldn't have happened for you if you didn't finally put yourself out there. And so for people listening, maybe they're seeking a job, maybe they have a job now, and they always envisioned this dream job, but they consider themselves, I should say, to be introverts. Because again, I used to think I was an introvert, but actually I was just like, no, I just, when I have something to say, I'm going to say it. I'm not just going to talk. You know what I mean? But for the people who do want to find their dream job, but are scared to, put themselves out there. They consider themselves shy or an introvert. Like, what's some words of wisdom that you can give these people?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's see, what would be words of wisdom that I'd say to these people? I think the biggest thing is that you can go after your dream job, your dream career, but I think the most important thing is truly your dream person, like who you are. Because I think ultimately that is going to be the filter and the perception that then you see the world in. And so I think that's the most important thing by far of like, if you face social anxiety and you feel like you can't be yourself or in front of other people, then I think that's your sort of direct goal. And I think a lot of times, like I've said this quote before, or I don't know if someone else said it, but it's kind of like gone viral on LinkedIn. But I said something like, if people took like half of the effort that they put into their job into like their life, like their dream life, not just their dream career, then they would be way farther in not only their career, but also their life. And so I think that is probably the biggest thing. And a lot of times people ask me like, how do you deal with it? How do you go for it? What I would say is like, you have to deal with your insecurities, your anxieties, your traumas, your fears offline before you try to take it online. So I think that's the biggest thing, right? Of like, I didn't record a video of my face until I started to recover from social anxiety. I didn't just jump right in there, So I think that's the biggest thing of like, you have to deal with it offline of like what you do in your 24 hours every day. And then also to put in some of that effort that you're putting in your dream job, put it in your dream life. Because I think if you're more fulfilled, then like kind of like what you said, then that'll help you work better also in your career and your job.
Awesome, Mark. That's beautiful, Mark.
Thank you for having me on. I mean, I appreciate it. This was so much fun.
No, this has been great. And again, for everyone listening, you can find Mark on LinkedIn. Just search Mark Metri. He's on Instagram at Mark Metri. Check him out on the Social Anxiety Society podcast on Spotify and Apple Music. Is there anything else, Mark, that you have going on that you want to let us know about?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is, I do like this group coaching where basically I'm starting the next cohort, like the next 2 weeks, where basically me and a group of other very like-minded people who kind of all face anxiety, social anxiety, we get together over a period of like 8-9 weeks. And we just like go through this like program, this ways we have conversations. I'd say that's something also, of course, like my podcast. And yeah, the best way where people can check that out is just my website, my first and last name, MarkMetry.com. And people can even contact me. If anyone has any questions for me, needs any advice or anything, feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm always down to respond.
All right, Mark. Thank you so much for coming on the HiredUp podcast. And, we look forward to having you on sometime again very soon.
Yeah, I'd love that. Maybe next time in person.
Yeah, exactly.
Woo!
Come out to Dallas.
Got to get me out to Dallas, yeah.
All right, brother. Thank you.